What's good, Fatherhead? Welcome to this edition of Uncommon, the Dad Work Show. We're going to go live with Mr. Victor Robledo today, and we're going to talk about all kinds of awesome shit that you need to know. How to become a cycle-breaking and legacy-making man, husband, father for yourself, for your family, for generations to come. You know that my vision is to create a world where dads can show up at their fullest potential day in and day out, no matter what life throws at them. I am here because I strive to empower dads to build the inner and outer strength, patience, presence, and become the cycle-breaking, legacy-making leaders for themselves, for their families, and for the world. And everybody that's in the chat, remember that we do this here because we want to hear what you have to say. So if you're in the chat, you're active, you ask questions, we're going to bring you in, not into this live with us, but we're going to answer those questions to the best of our ability. Victor, welcome. Victor Robledo here, husband, father, nomad, and coach. Thank you for being on with me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm still floating from our breathwork, my friend.
Yeah, I'm glad, man. I'm glad that you, even a breathwork master like yourself, that you enjoyed it.
No. It's rare that I am guided through. I usually am taking myself work, so it's always a nice journey.
Yeah.
To bring focus.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because I was just talking to somebody earlier today, and it's very parallel to what we experience as dads. As breathwork practitioners, it's very rare that someone else leads us. As dads, it's very rare that someone else shows up for us or that we show up for us because we're often pouring so much out into everybody else.
100%. Yeah, I think it's one of those nice things. This is why sometimes groups of men, similar-minded, gathering together to just either be guided or to be able to talk and be like, hey, we're all here for each other, which is really, I think, present. I think that's part of the reason that going into some of the talk that we started before is like I was drawn. I started training jiu-jitsu about 14 years ago for that reason. It became instantly the sanctuary that provided an opportunity for men, and for the most part, obviously there are women there and participate, but for the most part, it's mostly men. And this after training, sit by the walls, jar talk became absolutely essential at a time when I absolutely needed it.
Yeah, so walk me through that. Why did that talk? Why was that so beneficial for you, and why did you need it at that time?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I was recovering about my mid 30s. I went through a massive adrenal burnout. Adrenal fatigue would be the coined term to describe that, and it put me on my knees really, really bad at the time. I was working 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. in a brick and mortar. We taught gymnastics, and I was personal training at the same time. So I worked with children, and we had kids of our own. We took them with homeschool since the very beginning, so they're with us there all day. And I was feeling ragged, and but yet did not confide as to how ragged I was with my wife, because I'm the man. I wanted to show strength at all times, right? And when I started falling apart, my wife like jumped in wholeheartedly to the point where she was feeding me bone broth to get me off the couch, to get me to work. Like you got this. We can do. We can fix. We can repair this. And obviously, doctors at that point wanted to medicate me. I took one Xanax and threw the rest in the trash.
Wow.
I can't do this. I was high levels of anxiety, depression. My hormones were all over the place. And so my wife, thankfully at the time, said, hey, traditional resistance training doesn't look like it's serving you now. Why don't you get back into something that you really would connect on your physical body on a different level? And I was a wrestler in high school and about a millisecond in college. And it would seem like something I wanted to do. Of course, at the time we had three children and one on the way, and it did not make sense. But as soon as that first training session was over, I was hooked, and it led me to express. At that point, I hadn't even expressed anything, so it just gave me great people. Your best friends, when you're strangling them, all of a sudden it allows you to like really share things that you wouldn't normally do. And you're like, oh, this guy's safe because I tap to him all the time. He taps to me. And man, I'm just feeling wiped out. Yeah, me too, man. I got you. And it wasn't as deep as these days. I feel like I want to go with my clients, but it was a wonderful first start. It was
Mm.
and so that's how it catapulted me into really getting into this flow state, which I think is critical for a lot of men. The gyms are great, and I'm a strength and conditioning coach. By really for the last 30 years, I just define myself as that. But I want to get men into flow state, whatever that looks like, and it helps their mind get out of beta and get into that theta and relax. If you can find a sport, oh man, healing happens rather quickly. It's self-perpetuating.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much that that I think is really important for us to talk about in there. And one is that strength training wasn't serving you anymore.
Yeah.
And there's another dad's coach in our space that shared uh it was like pools we leaking, and the guy put taped on it, and the tape said workout on it. And I don't know that he understood what the implication was, but the workout was like, I'm taping up this generational trauma that's behind it, and I'm just gonna trap it in there. And
Yeah.
I also went through an experience where working out was great. It wasn't serving me anymore, and I
Right.
had to transition. Before that, though, being an experiencer of adrenal fatigue in my past, in my 20s as
Okay.
well, that led to erectile dysfunction and all of those things. What was that like? You were running ragged, and you
Yeah.
said you're falling apart. What was the experience of that like? Because I think that most guys haven't heard of this term.
Sure.
And two, most guys are living with something leading up to that, and they just don't know what it feels like. So, what was that experience like, and how did you start to heal from that?
So the first, I think I have to back up a little bit to give a little backstory to what potentially how we connect these dots, which is very, very important. I was my myself and my brothers and sisters were very badly sexually abused growing up. I was the oldest, and therefore, and was holding it together at the time when my parents find out. Kind of brushed under the rug. Family member. Okay, she was sent away. Let's not talk about this. We're good. But my brother and sister, younger than me, were falling apart tremendously with overt symptoms at that time. Victor, I need you to be a good boy and like hold it together.
Mm.
Check. So what I did was essentially push a lot of this down. Having being the oldest and wanting to really like make my parents proud of me at all times, I pushed that down. So I never spoke to anyone. Never spoke to my brother about it. Never spoke to my father about it. Never spoke to my mother about it. Never spoke to anyone. Fast forward, we go to 35, and I'll land this plane eventually. But I start feeling, how do I put this, very straight up dialogue. I felt like during my work day, which I shouldn't have been, like uh, the moment when this person who was doing bad things to me, as if it was happening all day long.
Mm.
That moment where this door opens up and you feel like, ah, geez, there's dirtiness to you, this this vulnerability. And I was like battling this level of anxiety. And that's what really, because I was up until then, okay, fatigue, like we train hard. Like I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and I was going to throw science on everything and become the strongest. But it got to a point where I was like, you know, I'm a little guy. I was pulling raw like 500 pounds off the ground, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't feel all that good about myself. I'm getting stronger, but I still feel essentially what was scared
Mm.
inside, and
Mm.
it's a real easy stretch. So at the time, sleep quality was cortisol started getting really inverted, and for our listeners, that's when you feel best in the evening as opposed to in the morning. More and more caffeine, more and more caffeine. Red Bull to work out, and it wasn't. I was only feeling good when I was lifting, and I had to lift intensely to feel good. And so then the sleep started to go, nutrition, digestion started to go sideways without getting too specific. Like I was just gassy, bloated all the time, nothing. And I was living at the time on what would be considered like bodybuilding square meal, like measured right, steamed broccoli, chicken, like very, very predictable food. And then the other thing is like I started to put on weight. I was like, what in the heck is going on? It really came to a point when we got on planes, we would go to North Shore and Kauai, which was incredibly healing and still is an amazing place for me. Where I read a book by Peter Levine. At that point, I'd already seen doctors. One doctor took me out because I'm like, hey, I think I have some issues with my adrenal glands. He walked me out and pointed to the people in the office and said, see all those people? They're sick. You're not sick.
Mm.
You're wasting my time.
Mm. Mm.
Damn. I'm like, okay, moving on. Thankfully, I came across an acupuncturist and naturopath who started to say some words that in my traditional education I had not heard of, like adrenal fatigue, adrenal insufficiency, and started looking to that. Read a book by Peter Levine called The Somatic Experience on the flight to Hawaii. And that's when the wheels really fell off. Oh, I looked at my wife, and at that point, we had been married almost 15 years, and I'd never explained the depths of my abuse and how bad it was and how I never spoke to anyone. And so it just all came out. And that's when like, then the insomnia drove up even worse to the point where it was probably a good 2 days that I did not sleep because I was in, and I share these stories not for pity, guys, but to share the vulnerability so you could be like, oh, dang, I've had that. And there is some help. 2 days really without sleeping, a wink, just crying, 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 crying. My wife's like, what is going on? And then I finally spilled the beans, and she's like, to tell her like the depths of what I've never shared. And after that, came back and we get to work on understanding how that trauma had come into my brain at a time, and this perfect storm had come together. And this is why I'm so adamant when I come into contact with someone, hop on a call right now. I can help you. I don't want you to get to the point where I got to. It's unnecessary. You have support. Like, let's get it out. Let's breathe into this space, understanding the body keeps score, holds it in the fascia, holds it, wires your brain to constantly be worried. Between that, living in a somewhat violent neighborhood, I'm not here to say I had the worst upbringing. My parents did the best that they had. First generation Americans living the American dream. The the neighborhood we lived at got really tough really quick. I was almost stabbed, guns pulled on me. So all of that starts to self perpetuate to me being wired for like, don't trust, right? The world's never safe. To the point that eventually the fatigue level got to some point where the body goes, okay, you want to be in the state? We got you. And that's where the work had to begin to regaining autonomy over the self. And I had to, and really, given without my children, without my family, I would have easily slid into a perpetuation of drugs and alcohol, or potentially, in my case, it probably would have been like, oh, I need TRT. And look, I'm not here to say you don't need to do that because we live in a world where our food's being destroyed by people to do that. But it's also can be like, okay, let's just put hormones on it. Well,
Yeah.
we have to be able to access these. I think that's a kind of a short abbreviation of what I was feeling and how that kind of tied into some of my trauma.
Mm. So, what was some of the work that you needed to do in order to start healing that?
Great question. Initially, being analytical in science and a health and fitness professional, I basically threw science on it. All right, I got to heal the gut. My GI health was off. All right, so we go. I'm going to take everything out. And actually, an interesting story. My acupuncturist like, hey, I want to run this high level test to find out what you are allergic to, because. And I said, look, I've been hurting for about a year. Tell me every single thing I could be allergic to, and I'm just cutting that out. And this is where that divine masculine comes in. I'm like, you know what? I'm done goofing around. Tell me everything. I'll eat dirt right now. It'll make me feel better. And so she said, well, that's like three things, like bone broth, a congee, which, essentially like a soup that that's so cooked that Vegetables are just falling apart, and fish. Done. Let's go. But I was hungry, but I was feeling better quite instantaneously. And I'm like, all right, there's something happening. GI health started coming along. I also needed to understand that exercise, this is an important one, being a health and wellness person can be good for you, but I had substituted, and thankfully, I was able to understand that my addiction was to exercise. I had done excess. I could have easily gone. It was just happens to be more widely accepted as an addiction form than cocaine. And I say that jokingly, but in the end, it was like my fix. I felt weak. Okay, was always the littlest guy in my class. My uncles gave me a weight set. At an opportune time, I just jumped in. It empowered me to feel strong. And so that was the first step: is redefining what exercise and what's appropriate for that. Train, don't drink. That's a Paul Chek. And thankfully, I was a Paul Chek fan from the very beginning, and I started to really understand what he meant by that. Train, don't drain. Oh, wait a second. And then I started to shift the kind of training for purpose. And then I started to play. And then this is where we shared the jiu-jitsu story about like just starting to get into my body again, connect in a way that served multiple purposes. Moved, elevated my heart rate, a connection with the self, a flow state, get me out of this potentially beta, of course. It can feel very fight or flight, so depending on people's trauma, I could see how that is a very aggressive martial arts, one of the few we can train at full speed. And so I do encourage most of the men that I work with to eventually get into martial art, but it doesn't have to be that one for that reason to get you into that focus. Then I started to understand a little bit more how trauma is stored in the body, and what that led me more into my yoga practice and pranayama at that point, and just understanding breath and how I was potentially linked to a poor breathing dysfunction. I test, and I don't know if you encounter this, Robert. 9 out of 10 people I test, I have some kind of breathing dysfunction through their whole life, right? And so I started to work on that in that practice. And I knew I was onto something when I would start going into Shavasana. I would do this wonderful practice, but guess what? I threw being good into yoga. Like, oh, I'm just going to be, as a gymnastics coach, I was already flexible anyway. I'm like, watch this. Mm-hmm. Until I was starting to get into Shavasana, because you have this physical exertion, and then I always would be in Shavasana, and I'd hit a panic. And I'd come up with a gap. And Rob was like, hey, you'd always be in class, like, hey, what's going on? I'm like, I can't explain it. And I'm like, I would just shift to relaxation, but my body was so uncomfortable with being in that position, it automatically put me into worry, panic to the kids, because at that point, I think Daniel, my oldest, was probably 13, 14, and we're like, hey, mom and dad are going to yoga. And so then I knew something like, oh, my brain, there's something going on. And that's when I started to really understand, started to delve deeper. But it wasn't until this pandemic that I really started to start my clients really struggling. And I jumped into like, okay, I need to go deeper. I need to go down the rabbit hole for myself, because I was so alerted. At that point, I was working behind closed doors, trying to make money to feed my family. Yeah. We're in the belly of the beast. We're in Southern California. Cops were patrolling, like trying to close people down, pulling people out of the beach. It was not a comfortable feeling. So I would get consistently in this triggered situation. Early on in COVID, I sent my wife away, and we agreed. And when I say we agreed, she said, "I'm in California. Are you coming with us? This is not right. We're living in an RV. We've full time for the last 9 years. We've come in and out of California so I could work with my clients, and then gradually the digital started to grow. And as she left, when I'd fly in to meet her, my family would always, Dad, you're not yourself. And it would take me some time to kind of get out of that trauma response. Like, there's got to be more. There's got to be more. So we went to the Music and Sky to start really working a deeper dive into Music and Sky Festival in California. Troy was there, one of the great speakers there, and really some of the initial breath work that I still use is based on that experience with him. He kind of goes commando into breath work, which I love. And I use a lot of times with people with high levels of anxiety, breathing aggressive into that breath of fire. But then I did a holotropic, and that took my healing to another level.
Mm-hmm. So you said something a moment ago that I wanna circle back on, and we can continue moving forward. You noticed that your clients were struggling, right? It was either like right before or right during COVID.
Yes.
What was going on there when you noticed that you're like, I need to go deeper? What was happening?
I think one of the biggest things I noticed with people in general, we had an acute active, there's a hypervigilance that and I recognized that, I saw that mirror. I'm like, oh, I remember a time when I was like that. Now, for me during that time, I did have that chronic build up, but I wasn't as vigilant or as acutely. Of course, everyone at the beginning was just like, oh, what is happening? But I noticed them extremely emotional. I would go like, look, we're good, we're safe, everything's good, you got food, okay, great. But I could see them increasing in their emotion, literally bringing back ghosts. Now, mind you, a fair amount of the clients had the privilege of working 20 years plus with them. And who I was 20 years ago is certainly not what I'm coaching now. And almost 30 years. At 19, I was working as a trainer, helping people. Well, that was about bench press and push-ups and a low-fat diet and getting your cardio. And now I wanted to delve deeper. And early on, I was like, if I know their emotional state, I know what I could work into their workouts. And so I could see that they needed more. And so I needed to jump in, understand the psyche. At that point, I'd already done a fair amount I had really started getting into Joe Dispenza and understanding the quantum field and understanding this power of the mind, the power of the placebo. And then doing somatic experience work early on when I was going through my adrenal fatigue. Now we pull in Gabor Mate, who's talking completely about the root causes of illness, and these light bulbs start going off big time for me. I go, I can do more. I'm going to jump in. And so I started helping them and getting it deeper into breath work and guided meditation. And then that's when I did that holotropic experience. I don't know if you have any experience with holotropic.
Mm-hmm. A little bit.
Yeah, so I did a holotropic healing, and I'm like, this is it. If I can help people to understand that their body's holding on to this, and I can give them a vehicle to offload that, then bandwidth goes up, right? Because you really, literally are carrying 4 freaking suitcases of all that garbage around with you. It doesn't give us the space. I used to think, well, people just lie to me. They're not
Mm-hmm.
telling me the truth of what they're eating. They're not. I'm just so busy, right? You know what I'm talking about,
Yeah,
right?
you're telling me my own experience in the training industry right now. Keep going.
And so he would tell me, I'm like, this, you weigh 100 pounds when you ate this. And really, what it was is the body was really, there's no actual, although Joe Dispenza does a wonderful job of putting the data behind it, like energy gets trapped, this is how it gets trapped. And then I started to understand, like, if I could help them offload that, metabolism response, energy response, endocrinology response, blood sugar management responds, and you're thinking to yourself in one breathwork session, even just a gentle breathwork session, we can calm the body down to a state where they begin healing and heal, and then the access of parts of the brain. You're not in fight or flight thought. You are now thinking with more clarity. So I didn't have the ability initially. I'm like, well, I don't know everything. It's I have 30 years of experience with weight training. I sometimes would joke with clients. I'm like, all I need to do is see your feet. I could tell you what your feet are doing by your face, or with the rest of your body doing by how you set up your feet. I just know you that well. And I was like, I could dot every I and cross every T on that one. I'm like, oh, I don't need. I don't feel as confident as I could. I'm like, look, I just need to. Am I helping? That's what my wife Robin would say. Are you helping? Yes. Let's go. That's Hippocratic oath. Do no harm. Let's go. Let's jump in. And with a hugely positive initial response on the first few people in the first groups that I guided, it was on. It was like, let's weave all this together into a holistic plan that can help people. Yes, you got to eat right, but I got to tell you, once people have a little more bandwidth, that happens naturally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah,
that's
it's it's so similar to why I got into this. And I got so fed up with working with men when I was a trainer. I was
Mm,
like, I don't want male clients because they fucking quit. And what I didn't realize is they had no model for working with stress.
right.
And when things got hard in life, they would just drop into their pre-programmed patterns of behavior because they had no bandwidth. And they also were carrying this trauma. You talked about trauma already, that was constantly buzzing underneath the surface that was taking so much of that bandwidth too. And I took a different path to get there, but same thing. Once I started learning how to breathe myself, and I describe it as I slept on my arm for half of my life, and then all of a sudden I moved my arm and it came back to life. It
Yeah,
wasn't to sleep anymore. That's what my life felt like.
yeah,
And I started to implement the same things with my clients, and then I was like, oh, this was the actual problem.
yeah,
It wasn't their discipline or willpower or that they had bad nutrition or training programs. It was this stuff underneath the surface. And Paul Chek says this all the time, is that our lives, our bodies, our existence is like a spider web. And people are like, yeah, well, how does strength training even relate to this? And I have clients that I've had for 10 plus years that I started doing this with, and all of a
yeah,
sudden we're seeing crazy results. You can't pull on one part of the spider web without affecting the entire thing. So when you start to work in this mental and emotional realm, you start to work with breath work. Like if we just talk about breath work only, you will influence
yeah, yeah.
everything else. One, curious what comes up for you from that. And then two, I want to know more about, you talked about the effects that this has in the brain, holotropic breath work. I want to go into that with you.
Yeah, so I discovered this was at the music aside during mid, like, it was almost like this hush hush thing. Troy was one of the speakers there. And I honestly can't tell you the gentleman's name off the top of my head, but they had a breathwork healing. And it's essentially like, again, I'm sitting on the shoulders of greatness myself. Nothing we've necessarily created. How I weave it in is really the uniqueness, and the prompts, etc., and coaching in general. But holotropic breathwork is at the same time, primitive breathwork, as you know, is like been around like since man. I mean, I think essentially it makes sense to me that essentially someone got into their own breath, reacted from a trauma experience. As we know in the somatic experience, Peter Levine talks about animals shaking off their trauma, and mammalians, we're the only mammalian that doesn't do it, right? We're
Yeah.
really not taught that way, taught to do that, and so it ends up being stored. And so holotropic breath work is both a combination of music to help us to access the subconscious. And it's not hypnotic in nature, but it is driving and beat, um, combined with a active inhale for 3 seconds, circular breath, inhale for three, active, passive out for three with no pause. You combine that with the music, with time, and with intention. Big one, guys, with the intention on accessing this. I've done this with many people. Um, I probably have done 500 healings at this point since we started, and it's only in the people that go in with like, hey, I don't know if I want to do that. No problem, we can stop if we need to. Everyone else, I mean, I have 500, two people that have just been really significant trauma and they weren't ready. 100% of the people have a positive, uh, cathartic release of this energy, just letting go and aches and pains that were there. And autoimmune disease over time. Dare I say cancer shrinking with use? Like yeah, it just leads me to believe in Matei's book, The Myth of Normal. He's dabbling at the concept like, hey, disease is actually not caused by this, but a repressed emotion. And people are like, okay, well, I get that for colds, but not for this. I'm like, well, would it be surprise you that other people who have millions of dollars in stockholders would not want you to know about the possibility of healing through? It's not like I walked into the ER with a massive, like, what was a panic attack, and never once did they ask me like, hey, what's going on in your life, man? What's going on?
Yeah.
Like, they don't pull up a chair and never say that. Like, They ask me what supplements. I say I take creatine monohydrate. I take 5 grams post workout. Oh, it's the creatine. I'm like, it's not a stimulant. And they just didn't know, but they want to just be like they're plugging you in, like, oh, you need to take Xanax for the next couple of weeks, and that'll bring you down. I, I've never taken any medication. I don't even take ibuprofen at the time. I'm like, I'm not taking this. And so holotropic breath work, when I found it and discovered it, I realized that it could work. It can get people out of their own way because we access the subconscious. And then eventually we say life is your meditation. And you're now hovering. And that's not to say that I have this figured out. This is one of the biggest things that I think I share with people. I'm like, look, even as little as yesterday, I get to be this like I observe myself now and go, "Ooh, I was an 8-year-old then. I was that scared 8-year-old. Yeah, I threw a little hissy fit, but I can get getting better and better at it. And so it gives me the ability to tell people like, look, there is a learning curve. You can do this, and there are coaches and there are support groups that can get you to the point where you're feeling like you actually get to live your life. But so many people are head below the water, drowning, that they don't realize, and they think they're head above water. Is all of a sudden, yes, this is life. Wait a second. What kind of life do you want to live? What is your why? What is your purpose? And look, I love Jocko. Discipline equals freedom. I get it. But you ever realize how many people can't even step into that? You alluded to it. And it's because of this other stuff that's a little harder for us to talk about as men. We want to throw man. And to me, I'm here to, I always tell my kids this. I have 5 kids. Here's your hug, and here's your pat on the butt. Let's go.
I love that.
We have to embrace both of it. Like especially teaching gymnastics. I learned early on. We are in Coronado, and I had to get the parents out of the room because if a child fell, what does what does a mom or a father?
Yeah.
They have a tendency like, oh my gosh, are you hurt? And I'm used to seeing kids fall all the time. Like, he's fine. Let's not overreact. Let's see how he rolls. I can tell if it's a real injury or it's like, let's let the crocodile tears. Okay. Hey, are you okay? What do you need? I tell the children when I used to teach, I teach every kid just like their mind. What do you need from me right now? I don't think you're that hurt. I can get you a Band-Aid on it, but we have a whole lot more fun. And call your mom. We have a whole lot more fun. I think you can shake it off, and sometimes we would shake it off and keep going. Oh, I just need a hug. Boom, you got it. Let's go. And I think many men never got that. They got a lot of like, man, men don't show emotions. Be tough. Stoicism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that's kind of a long way to describe why I think it's so valuable for men. And I do this work with women as well. So it just happens because my heart goes out to a man when I see them and they're running behind and they're struggling with their family. And I coach some men right now that are so far behind on the example they want to be for their family that it's difficult because I'm like, you haven't had down the layer of discipline. Well, I don't want to say no. You don't want to say no to your child? Why do you think that comes from? Well, he was overknown, right? Or he was too harsh by his dad, so he doesn't want to become his dad, right? And I come from 2 working. My parents both worked, so like latchkey kid was what we were called, like. And so at some point they were overstressed, money, well, they weren't emotionally available. Like, here we go. Like, you have a kid who is being told that they're loved, but what are the actions, right? And that perpetuates now as an adult. At some point, your body says, like, what about me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's the saying that habits aren't caught, they're taught.
Yeah.
And through our example, and you were talking about the parents, how they react with the kids in there when they fall down, and that's how we program. That's how we install the programs into our kids' nervous systems and into their psyches that they get to carry forward. And if we don't figure this stuff out and give them the tools, well, we can maybe hope that someday they'll figure it out and heal themselves. And I want to segue then into generational trauma. Thanks, Alex. I see you. Love you too, brother, in the chat. I want to segue into generational trauma and just explore this concept with you because you talked about childhood abuse from you. This stuff tends to travel in families. Everything. We have diabetes in my family. We have divorce in my family. Heart attacks, high blood pressure. That if I didn't change, I would have gone down the same route. So one, I want to know this concept of generational trauma. Mark Willin talks about how it carries for 3 generations. There's research that it goes further. What are the stakes here? What is generational trauma? What are we doing?
Yeah, I think that my definition of it as we guided people through breath work and guided them through deeper, more subconscious transformations is that I think we're semantics. We're talking 3, 4 generations. Although I can look back at mine and I can see where it might have perpetuated, and and I see how my potential worry. It's actually ironic that you mentioned that when we did our breath work, and you had me to bring in into my heart something, and I bring in lots of different things, but it's been a while since I remember into my heart carrying that. My oldest son is Daniel. When he was the day he was born, I'm like, oh wow, having that one, that was very powerful. And I think to myself, I find it. You wouldn't be surprised to know that when I went through my adrenal fatigue is about the same age that Daniel was, and so when I was abused. And so I remember going like, it must have flipped the trigger. Oh my God, I would tell my wife, God, I don't want him to feel like I did. And she's like, hey, chill out. He's good. And I just couldn't wrap my head around it. No. This is how he feels, and he's scared all the time, and he can't sleep. And it was really just my body going, imprinting on that. And I could see how not being checked, I would have perpetuated that onto him. Like, no, it's dangerous. Be safe. Have this edge to you. You don't want to be bullied. All these other things that were essentially just my own brain. So it happens. Generational trauma is happening so much on the subconscious level. All the messages, and I see it, and I've been able to see it. I have this data point of working with children for 25 years, teaching them. And the parents would come in and they're like, well, I really want this and I really want this. I'm like, okay, well, the most powerful thing you can be for them, just be for them what you want them to be. That's the most powerful thing. You want them to care about the food they're eating, you care about the food they're eating. You want them to move, you enjoy movement. I can model that because that's what I am. But at the end of the day, they're going home to you. And so the relationships, I could see them. And there's plenty of kids that I work with that come to mind where mother's coming in like, hey, I don't want them to have, she needs to lose weight. I'm like, she's 8. Like, let's calm down. She's in a gymnastics class. Every body is different, right? On my job as a coach is as that kid's strong. They might be a little bit more dense than this kid over here. That kid can't do a pull up and this one can't. Like, all of a sudden you're like, hey, let me quantify this for you. Like, don't worry. Like, good whole foods diet, etc. Is that when we talk generational trauma, I talk about these messages that come out of our mouths and the worry. Like some of the earliest things that when we first started our travels, there are lots of Bureau of Land Management, BLM management land in lots of different places where you can free camp. I couldn't sleep. Like, there's no one here. This can't be right. How can we be here? I had this and when we traveled to Europe, I couldn't get over not feeling safety when we travel all over the world. And that's where I knew, I'm like, this is not to do with this. These are the messages and carried potentially. And so whether it's carried we know that the fetus is feeling whatever the mother's feeling. Well, you take that 3 generations, here we go. Now you have an underlying, you're going to be worried, you're going to be wired to be worried, you're not going to be relaxed. Then you take actual trauma that happened to you as an individual, and now that's perpetuating and stacking. So the way I see it is a consistent mindset, additionally with significant things, and none of us are without any. Once in a while, I'll have a person that says, I'll share my story, not as a oh, poor me, but just to create common ground. Just like I share with you, hey man, I got you. Yeah, I feel you, man. But they're like, I don't have anything that's like that. it doesn't matter if you have what I had. It's
Mhm.
your unique soul that's dealing with that, and it might have been significant to your soul, and that's what we have to permeate through. And now that you know it might be running the show, and either an amygdala hijack or a wiring problem for the brain, now it's your choice to enact and go, hey, are you going to live by this, or are you going to take action? Because I've now helped you with truth. The truth is that this is not what you want to be as a father. Like, let's cry about it, but let's move forward.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's a capital T or little t trauma.
Yeah, right.
It's a trauma to you. It's a break from the status quo in your life, and it's one that you perceive as negative. And if you don't have the tools, you talked about animals, they shake, they breathe, they change their vision, and all of a sudden they discharge the stressful energy. They complete the cortisol loop. If you weren't able to do that when it happened, sorry, I got a baby monitor right here
All good.
checking in on a nap. Then your psyche is going to put you in a position so that you can complete that loop at some point, over and over and over until you're able to do it. And I had this irrational fear that I was going to fail. I was going to lose everything. I wouldn't be able to pay the bills. And then that's not the irrational part, because my dad was like, everybody struggles with that. We talked about
Yeah.
this great advice before we got on this call. The fun part was I started to look deeper, because I was like, oh, I am afraid that I'm going to end up on the streets and I'm going to lose my family. That's really interesting. So I started to ask my mom and my dad. I was like, I need everybody's family history. Here's the tree that I had. I need to know what happened with
Yeah.
everyone. And it turns out that just a few generations back, my grandfather's side, they had so little money, they had to split up the family and give the kids to family members because they couldn't take care of them.
Yeah.
And when I found that out, I was like, oh, oh, I'm feeling that in my body, right? And maybe this isn't mine. Maybe this is something that we've carried for a few generations. And having done the practices that I have, I was like, oh, I get to remedy this. I
Yeah.
get to heal this. I get to change this.
Yeah.
And that's another example of like, this can be something in your life. This could be something that's been following you through the generations that you're like, yeah, that's bullshit, but you're still experiencing something inside that's out of alignment with your lived experience. And that's a flag for you to go deeper and complete the cycle.
100%. That resonates so much with me because essentially, I have some similarities. Like meat, for example. My dad was like to this day prides himself on like, oh, we put meat on the table because they did not have enough money. They would live on vegetables, and I would dabble in and grab in. But it reminded me of something we spoke of before. So if you're having trouble doing it for yourself, guys or gals, this was my source. I think this is the beauty of it wakens something within you to have a child, to like be a father. And all of a sudden I started to do when I started to do my breath work before I would sit down or when I would sit down, I would start off with the intention, it ends with me, it ends with me, it ends with me, so that I wouldn't perpetuate that. And like I have now 25, 23, 20, 15, almost 14 or 13. And I can kind of see to the point, my our parents weren't even taught in many ways. I don't know my relationship, but we certainly didn't talk about these things, and certainly not after. But when this all went down, my kids knew. I was like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. I am immortal. And so many men are so afraid to show that side. I've wept in front of them during that time. And at first I was all sorts of like, oh, I need to show strength, which I was like doing for sure. But then I was like, I couldn't even control it. And so I always recommend to like, hey, let them see you low. You know why? Because they also see you never give up. And it's super important to just be like, hey, I'm human as a dad. I make mistakes. I have bad days. And it's okay It's like the taco analogy. Like tacos fall apart, you still love them, right?
Yeah.
And so I think once in a while when we feel that mortality, like and certainly there's a potential level that you could potentially decide between you and your spouse. If you like, hey, what I'm feeling low. How much do you think is important to let them feel or see? But through our travels, my kids have always known how much challenge it's been for me with anxiety and these like this sense of uncertainty. They've known. They'll also every opportunity like man, you just don't. There's no give up in you. Nope. Let that be a lesson to you.
Yeah.
Roots deep doing the work, and they're my. I want to become my children. I want to, and you probably see that, and you're like, you have this beautiful energy. Yes,
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
be that.
Yeah.
And some of us
Man.
didn't have
You're so relentlessly happy, man. And then you feel fully and then you come
that.
back to it. You're so
Yeah,
sweet, man.
yeah, right. Like it's really we want that allows us. I think having children another greater thing, right? Like these children came to you and your spouse, like and your partner. And I think there's a reason behind that, and all of it happens for a reason. And we're just living in a time where it's like a sin, right? It really is, and this is something deeper. Like the world we live in was created to make it profitable for for certain people, not necessarily what's in the best interest of
Yeah.
humans and human biology and nurturing a family. And I feel very lucky to to have been able to be like, no, I want you, my wife, to be the most dominant person in my children's lives. We're going to take this choice because we get a lot. I mean, we're there are a lot of people full time travel, but not many people do it very long.
Mm-hmm.
We're now 9 years essentially on the road and seeing the fruits of like essentially sacrificing. When you decide to have children, yes, you can have a career, but you have to create this beautiful balance where you're available for them. And the most powerful thing that I tell parents to be is like, sure, be like them, but you have to just be there to listen. Kids want to talk so much and they have that expression.
Yeah.
And if you can just listen for 20 years of dealing with kids, that's the most powerful thing. Listening. I would help them with exercise, but once in a while I would say, hey, you want to take your turn doing cartwheels? No, I just want to talk to you. Okay, go ahead, talk to me. But I'm going to let these people take while you talk to me. And when we can do that, not only for our children, it also perpetuates healing because now you are fully present. That's what I loved about my job working with kids. I don't teach classes per se anymore, but it kept me so in the moment, and it kept me in this position where I was like, wow, I get it, have an expression with these children and see them grow and see them get stronger. And parents, like, really, it's stacked against us. So, like, controlling the food that we eat, controlling what's going in the old noggin, controlling what's the experience of that, how much outside time they have, what they're learning. At this point, our two youngest are essentially completely Socratic. They learn what they are passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not pushing anything on them. And they are just follow whatever there is. But I also have children that have been nurtured. They wake up and read 2 hours, like because we've nurtured. They don't know that reading is not cool,
Yeah.
but they don't have, they don't have like we don't generally have internet. We don't just, I do my work here, but it's not like they get to watch TV. So it helps tremendously, social media, etc. So I think that rounds out a little bit of like the generational trauma and how I see it perpetuating in modern life. Everything from just accepting, well, this is just the way. I think that's a generation. When we're not questioning, we're not in our right mind. And so as a father, I encourage dads to question everything. Is this cup? Is this the one we want to have in our house?
Mm-hmm.
Why not? Why not? Question it all. Well, the so and so plays does this word and this one. Well, does that serve you and your family and your vision for this child? Because life is amazing. One thing that's traveling and seeing all these beautiful places has taught me is that you can you don't know until you experience it. You don't know until you're in that space how much healing can be possible and how much joy you can feel. But sitting in traffic, while it has to be something we all do, that's not really what life and the potential creator, the quantum field, whatever you want to call it, really designed for us to be.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned something a few minutes ago. We're really on this topic of creating a new way for our kids and showing them our authenticity, our autogentis, our self-governance, who we really are. And we have a practice in the house. I keep a feeling wheel on the refrigerator. We each have our own magnet. So each time we walk by it, we're just like, here's how I'm feeling right now. And my son's 3, but he knows that dad's better after dad does breath work. And so I'll come out here and I'll invite him into the practice and he'll play. He'll do some burpees and yoga because he sees me do that. And then he'll just sit in my lap. The other day, he sat down and kneeled in front of me and put his hands in my hands while I was meditating.
Oh.
You know, we're giving them those examples. And also, when we're playing, I'll let him know, like, hey, daddy's feeling a little sad right now. And that's okay. Daddy's allowed to feel this, and we're still going to have fun. And he'll see me tap and take a breath and regulate at times and shift. And then when he's feeling, we do the same thing together. I'll sit down with him. I'll breathe until sometimes he'll breathe with me until he comes down. I notice you're feeling really sad right now. What's going on? Do we want to tap? Do we want to shake? Do we want to be monkeys together? And giving them these tools, because I can't imagine the world that they are faced with in 1 year, not to mention 10, 20 years. I remember when cell phones came out. When I was 15, I got my first phone. Now that phone is in a museum. That's insane to me.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine the world that they're going to be faced with in 10, 20 years. And if they don't have these tools, we see the rising numbers of mental and emotional diseases. And we're talking about working through your own trauma right now and developing the ability to manage pressure in your life. I can't imagine the toll that that's going to take on them. And that's really what I feel like I owe to them. Moving towards wrapping this thing up, anything else coming up for you? And then 2, what's the most powerful piece of advice that you could give to the men, the fathers listening to this that they could start implementing today?
Well, if you're just starting out, movement is medicine. So whether it's an actual, move in a way that resonates with you. If you're struggling, start off just moving. Explore everything from qigong to tai chi to breath work, and see what gives you that next paver. I always tell my men and my women, like, deer in the headlights is the worst place to be. Let's step in a direction of progress. And there are millions of coaches out there, yourself, me included. It doesn't have to be from us. But a lot of times we're too close to the problem to actually see the solution. And so when I ask, I have one gentleman that I recently started working, and having him do sacral chakra type move things to rediscover that inner child once again. And he's like, like, this doesn't resonate. I don't understand. Can you explain to me more? And I'd explained it. I'm like, look, it's not about playing the guitar. It's about a discovery of the self that will light a fire that will perpetuate forever. But if you don't light that fire and you're just grinding in willpower, will take you a certain amount of time. But if you keep going to the well, you're going to come up dry. So find what actually perpetuates that balance within you. It is there. You've been taught to believe that it's not there. If you can start scratching at the surface, great food in, move, get out in the sun, find out, get in contact with that inner child, understand the roots of what you're carrying might not just be what's currently stressful. If you take a current stress, and that's usually enough. But if you can just say, like, you know what? I got some stuff that might be taking up bandwidth. Just that thought alone will start to perpetuate scratching more, digging a little deeper. You can live a vibrant life. You can live a life in alignment with who you are. I'm here to tell you, I have massive scarcity problems. And it was only subtle vision. I couldn't even see it, but I could feel what I wanted to create in my family. And I could feel that I was like, oh, I can persevere like no one's business. I can get through this. And if you can feel what you want to create, go towards it. Go towards it. Develop that practice. Your family, your family life, you won't be sharing the stories. You'll be sharing stories. The family we wanted to create. I know I wanted a family. To give you an example, where I could pick up a sport at 50. This is my first year skiing. I was like, well, I need to have a body. My kid goes, hey, learn skiing with me. I could go do that. So that was one of my earliest memories. I needed to be. I want to be 50. I want to be 60 to teach my grandkids how to ski. Right? So I am now doing the things now that will perpetuate that. But most people don't have that forward thinking because they're in survival. So the breath work would probably be another major one. They're like, breathe in a way, reestablish that breathing to get you into a calm state so your mind can work and help you to start visualizing that.
Amazing. Hell yes, man. Thanks for being here, brother.
Hey, I really appreciate you. You're doing an amazing job. And anytime you ever need anything, you let me know.
Hell yeah, man. Where can we find you? What you're up to? How can we get involved in what you're doing?
So, easiest place to find us is Nomads with a Purpose. That's our travel blog. We've been traveling, like I said, 9 years, and the party's still going on that way. You can see our adventures. If you're interested in potentially looking in, getting a consult, getting into coaching, my individual Instagram on Coach Victor Robledo, you can get there. We additionally have a group site called BeTheHero.Academy, where for a lot of people, they can't afford our services on a one-to-one basis. So we started to put a lot of the information on there. So because I think it's so important, like this, I'm hoping one person is like their life is changed by these dialogues. It really, and I had to get into a good space because I used to think to myself like, well, I had to work really hard to acquire this information, and I have to feed my family. That's the personal trainer coming in, right? Like instead, I want to perpetuate and just put the information out there. It's out there. It's all accessible. It's ancient wisdom, like breath work, yoga, movement, getting into natural elements, like go to the ocean to heal the body, go to the mountains to heal the mind, go to the desert to heal the soul. Like these are Native American, um, things that are said and known. And if you can just get yourself into these spaces, you can get it. But those are the easiest ways to get a hold of us. Of course, get a hold of this man. He's making some waves here, along with the guys at Frequency of Fatherhood. Like I was really blown away at everything we created there. And Alex Lang is doing an amazing job of gathering that and spearheading that. And I think there will be a lot more collaboration on all of these fronts to help guys.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Thank you for being here and have an uncommon day.
Hey, you too. Take care.
Peace.